Dallapiccola was an Italian composer born in 1904 and died in 1974. He was one of the rare serial composers who wrote music that was lyrical and accessible. Here we'll look at his Piccola Musica Noturna for a chamber ensemble, a lovely small piece, typical example of his style. Fortunately, I can't play it here due to copyright restrictions, so I recommend that you listen to it on YouTube before going further with this lesson. The YouTube versions are for a larger ensemble, but for our purposes that doesn't really matter. I don't know the series on which this piece is based, but that doesn't really matter since what counts is how it sounds. So my analysis will focus on what we can hear in an attentive listening. This is a short lyrical piece. It's not tonal in any sense, but that doesn't mean there's no sense of musical direction or punctuation. Let's look at it in detail. The start of the piece presents a three-note motive in the clarinet. This little cell, including both minor and major thirds and a minor second, is omnipresent and will act as a unifying aspect of the harmony. And since it's short, only 3 notes, it's easily recognizable when it occurs. Apart from the opening, here are just a few places in the piece where this cell is prominent. Measure 22, 23, and 24. Measure 28, 29. Measure 33. Measure 35. Measure 39 to 41. Everywhere in this rising arpeggio, measure 45 to 6, and measure 64 to the end. If you look at the way the line develops in measure 1 to 3, notice how the first high notes soon rise progressively. The written pitches are C, C sharp, E flat, and E. This is a transposed part since it's played by the clarinet. This gives the line a sense of direction. Then in measure 3, it breathes, circling around the same notes. In measure 4, we hear the first of several homophonic interruptions. Under a pedal A and a harp and viola, the harmony goes from a tritone to a major second to a major third and then a minor third. Presenting new intervals simultaneously, unlike the melodic progression in the first 3 bars creates richness, the pedal tone unifies the progression. This combination of larger intervals with the pedal tone is common to most of these interruptions. Then the melodic texture returns in measure 7 to 11, now in the oboe and flute. This line, with its major and minor seconds and tritone, seems to grow to the chords we just heard in measure 4 and 5. The melody now also uses the tritone as a peak interval, first in measure 8 in the clarinet, and then echoed in measure 9 in the flute. Its range is larger than the first phrase because of the tritone. Again, this creates a sense of formal progression. Note how Dallapiccola subtly spaces out the string tremolos below, so they're not just constant in one instrument. Then, in measure 12, we have the next chordal interlude, once again around 3-note chords, including a pedal D, which is now below the booming parts. The intervals are larger than they were before. In measure 45, the overall range was a major 6th. Now it's an octave plus a 5th. This again creates a sense of overall progression as these gestures recur. In measure 15, we have a 2-part contrapuntal texture, now turning around major and minor thirds and finishing on a major 7th. Then, in measure 16, the celesta seems to improvise around the last 2 notes of measure 15, using a perfect 5th as a kind of neighbor interval. This leads to several short runs in the clarinet and then in the flute. Clarinet runs have a prominent tritone as well as a perfect 4th in measure 18. Then in measure 19-20, the flute echoes the perfect 4th at the top of its phrase, echoed again by a final perfect 4th tremolo in the violin. Underneath, in measure 18 to 20, the viola moves around a pedal A, which makes a semitone distance with the high A flat. The next interruption is a simple unison on E, before Dallapiccola returns to the open material. Note that the pitch E has not appeared at all in over 10 bars, so it creates a sense of novelty as well as of resolution. We can see that Dallapiccola controls the rate of chromatic circulation very carefully in each passage. The music is never totally chromatic. This has the same effect as the tonal key or mode. It limits the amount of information the user has to absorb, which allows us to develop expectations and then surprises like this E. A few overall observations. There are no octaves ever in harmony and never any octave doubling. How does Dallapiccola prevent the harmony from becoming suffocating, which is a common problem in 12-tone music? Well, the texture alternates between 2 or occasionally 3-part counterpoint and short homophonic passages. There are almost never more than 3 pitches sounding at the same time. Although the score looks somewhat fuller, the extra parts are just doublings of some notes in the main lines. These doublings are either gentle background resonance to enrich the texture, or else they add movement, for example the tremolos in measure 12. There's a lot of repetition also, which enables the listener to grasp the motives. This also slows the rate of pitch circulation in keeping with the calm mood of the piece. This is the equivalent of the idea of harmonic rhythm in a tonal piece. Dissonant chords in this piece never contain more than one semitone dissonance at a time. Semitone dissonances are the strongest, so having several in the same chord would be very intense. Formal progressions of various kinds, like rising pitch in a melody, or thickening or thinning texture, or rising or falling register, create a feeling that music is not just stuck in one place, that it evolves. As we can see, Dallapiccola's masterful compositional technique is what makes his serial compositions as expressive as they are. Using a series is not a guarantee of anything if the composer has not mastered the craft of composition, which after all comes from componere, which means putting together. How the composer puts the musical resources together into a meaningful whole is always the ultimate test.